Hello students, my name is Niyati Said and thanks for watching Edupedia World videos. My topic for the presentation is second section of Digestion and Absorption chapter. So let's proceed towards our chapter, that is digestion. Esophagus. The esophagus is the first part of the digestive tract proper. It is also where the third phase of swallowing occurs. Approximately 10 inches in length, it consists of 3 tissue layers consistent with the rest of the gut. Once in the proximal portion of the esophagus, the muscles of peristalsis begin propelling the food bolus through the esophagus into the stomach. Okay? And no further digestion takes place in this compartment. The pharynx and the esophagus, they serve only as a conduits for digestion. Okay? So you can say that esophagus is similar to the conveyor belt as it transfers the food from the mouth to the stomach in just 3 to 6 seconds. Just imagine that in just 3 to 6 seconds, food bolus is transferred from mouth into the stomach by the help of esophagus that acts like a conveyor belt. Circular muscles in the wall of the esophagus, they relax in front of the bolus, whilst circular muscles behind the food contract, and thus it pushes the bolus onward. And this process is known as peristalsis. And this process is involuntary in action. That means people do not have conscious control over the muscles in the esophagus. Even if someone is upside down, the food will be passed onto the stomach. Okay? Now we'll study functions of esophagus in detail. First function is, of course, swallowing. Okay? The humans and the other animals, food is ingested through the mouth. During swallowing, food passes from the mouth through the pharynx into the esophagus. Esophagus is thus one of the first components of the human digestive system and the human gastrointestinal tract, that is GIT. Okay? After food passes through the esophagus, it enters the stomach. And when food is being swallowed, the epiglottis moves backward to cover the larynx. Larynx is a voice box, and thus it prevents food from entering into the trachea. At the same time, the upper esophageal sphincter relaxes, and thus it allows a food bolus to enter. Rhythmic contraction of the esophageal muscle is known as peristalsis, that we have already read, okay, and that pushes the food down the esophagus. These rhythmic contractions occur both as a reflex response to food that is in the mouth and also as a response to the sensation of food within the esophagus itself. Along with the peristalsis, the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes, and thus swallowing is accomplished, which is a function of esophagus. Now the second function of esophagus is reducing gastric reflux. Gastric means stomach. Okay? The stomach generates strong acids including hydrochloric acid, that is HCl, and the enzymes to aid in food digestion. This digestive mixture is called as gastric juice. Constriction of the upper and the lower esophageal sphincters help to prevent reflux of gastric contents and juices into the esophagus, and thus it protects the esophageal mucosa, which is a lining of a esophagus. In addition, the acute angle of His and the lower crura of the diaphragm helps this sphincter action. Okay? Now comes the pharynx. Pharynx, the role of the pharynx is to facilitate the passage of the food bolus into the esophagus. The pharynx is designed to direct the food bolus in this direction. It is here where the second phase of the swallowing takes place. After the moistened food bolus is moved to the back of the mouth by the tongue, an involuntary swallowing reflex is triggered, which prevents food from entering the respiratory tract. The tongue closes off the mouth, the soft palate blocks the nose, and the larynx, that is a voice box, it rises such that the epiglottis closes off the trachea. Food then moves from the pharynx into the esophagus. Okay. As you can see that this is the larynx, which is a passage for air and which closes when it swallows. Okay. And pharynx is approximately 15 centimeters long. Okay. Now comes the digestive glands. Digestive glands are the group of the specialized secretory cells that are found in the lining of the alimentary canal or the accessory. Okay. As you can see that in our mouth there are about three glands, such as parotid gland, sublingual gland, and the submandibular glands. Okay, so these are the digestive glands that help in the digestion. Okay. And now what is peristalsis? Peristalsis is a series of the involuntary wave-like muscles contraction which move food along the digestive tract. See, this is the muscle that is in the relaxed form, and this is the circular muscle, or you can say circular muscle lining. Okay, this is the food bolus that moves from the mouth to the stomach. Okay, the direction of movement is from here to here. Okay, and these are the longitudinal muscles. This is how the way muscles contract itself, then it reaches to the this end, and thus it relaxes, and thus finally food bolus moves to the stomach. Okay, and this process is not in our control. This is completely involuntary. Okay. Now comes the pharynx and the esophagus. Okay, pharynx is a common passage for digestive and the respiratory system. When food material passes through the pharynx, the epiglottis closes the glottis, that is opening of the larynx, and thus it prevents the entry of the food into the trachea. Okay, as you can see that this person is ingesting something, and thus this is the epiglottis, and it closes off because to prevent it from entering into the trachea. This is the trachea, this is the trachea, and this is the food pipe. Okay. Now comes the esophagus, which is about 30 centimeter long. It is a muscular tube that acts like a conveyor belt. Food bolus moves from the mouth to the stomach by the help of esophagus. Or you can say that esophagus is the first part of the digestive tract proper. It is also where the third phase of the swallowing occurs. Approximately it is 30 centimeter long. Okay, it consists of 3 tissue layers consistent with the rest of the gut. Once in the proximal portion of the esophagus, the muscles of the peristalsis begin propelling the food, as we have just read in my previous slide, and through the esophagus it enters into the stomach. This is a stomach. Okay, and the food bolus is entering into the stomach. Okay, no further digestion takes place in this compartment, that is esophagus. Just the role of pharynx and the esophagus is that they serve only as a conduits for digestion. Okay, and As you can see that this is a food bolus that is entering from the mouth, and this is the esophagus. It enters the esophagus, and by the action of the peristalsis or the circular muscle contraction, it reaches to the this part of the proximal part of the stomach. Okay, and this is the sphincter that regulates the opening of the stomach. Okay, and thus it enters, finally it enters the stomach. As you can see that it is a C-shaped pouch that receives the food bolus from the esophagus. It aids both in mechanical and the chemical digestion, acting like a churn. It acts like a churn. Okay, the stomach mixes the food with gastric acid and breaks down the food into a milky substances known as chyme. Okay, the acid reduces the pH of the stomach in the process, which allows activation of the enzyme called pepsin. This starts the chemical digestive process. Okay, as we know that mechanical digestion takes place in the mouth, but here when the food bolus has entered the stomach, chemical digestion begins. Okay, now come to the stomach. As I have just told you that it is a C-shaped pouch that receives the food bolus from the esophagus. It aids both in the mechanical and the chemical digestion, and it also acts like a churn, and the stomach mixes the food with the gastric acid, and thus it breaks down the food into milky substances known as chyme. And the acid or the gastric acid reduces the pH of the stomach in the process, which allows activation of the enzyme called pepsin. And this is where chemical digestion starts. Okay, stomach is for storage and the digestion of food. Please note that. Okay, it has three parts. Upper is the fundus part, middle is the cardiac stomach part, and the third is the lower or the posterior pyrolic stomach, which is also known as antrum. Okay, this is the esophagus. This is the food bolus which is about to enter the stomach. This part is known as fundus. This part is known as middle part is known as cardiac stomach, and this part or the posterior lower part is known as pyrolic stomach or the antrum. Okay, I hope it's clear to all of you. And pyrolic stomach leads to the small intestine by an opening pyrolus. Okay, as you can see that this pyrolic part has an opening by which it opens into the small intestine. Okay, as you can see this illustration, the pyrolic part opens into the small intestine, and it is guarded by pyrolic sphincter, or sphincter you can say it's like a door. Okay, that regulates the opening and the closing. Inner wall of the stomach bears longitudinal folds that we generally call as ruggy. Okay, ruggy. Now we'll study about its function. Food storage, of course, it can stretch to fit 2 food. 2-liter food. Okay, it can disinfect food. HCl is about, it has a pH of about 2 that kills bacteria and other germs. Chemical digestion takes place in the stomach. Okay, pepsin helps in it, as I have told you, and which is the enzyme that breaks down the protein, of course. Okay, this is illustration of a stomach. These green particles are the food bolus or food particles that has been broken down. This is the pyrolic sphincter, and this is the fundus part. This is the cardiac stomach part. This lining is made up of, you can say, lining is a epithelium. Epithelium is again zoomed, and now it is seen that this is the interior surface of the stomach. Okay, and gastric glands such as mucous cells, chief cells, parietal cells are of course associated with it. Okay, that helps in the digestion of the food. And these are the chief cells. These are the chief cells, or you can say this is the zoomed part where pepsin works. This is showing that these are the chief cells. These orange colors are the chief cells, and this is a parietal cell. It has given HCl, or parietal cell secretes HCl, and these orange one that is a chief cell, it secretes pepsinogen. Pepsinogen gets converted into pepsin, okay, which is an active enzyme, okay, and which helps in the digestion of the food, okay, where actually chemical digestion starts, okay. But the stomach is made up of protein. What stops the stomach from digesting itself? Mucus secreted by stomach cells protect stomach lining. Okay. This is the illustration that this is the mouth that breaks up the food, that digests the starch, that kills the germ, and that moistens the food. Okay. And this is the stomach that kills germs, break up food, digest protein, and store food. Okay. And this is the sphincter. Okay. A sphincter that regulates the opening and the closing. Okay. Now, the enzyme pepsin is also active in the stomach. It starts the breakdown protein to form peptides and the amino acids. Alcohol and a little water is absorbed by the stomach. Alcohol is absorbed through the stomach wall and taken to the liver where it is metabolized. Okay, that's why this is the reason that alcohol is not advisable for pregnant ladies. That's because alcohol, it interferes with the baby, or you can say that it interferes with the embryo food. Okay, because alcohol is absorbed through the stomach wall and it is taken to the liver ultimately where it is metabolized. Okay, when the food has been churned into a creamy mixture known as chyme, the pyrolic sphincter, or you can say the ring of muscles, it opens and the chyme is released gradually into the small intestine. Okay, now comes the gastric juices, which is secreted by the stomach. pH is about 1.5 to 2.5, and that's all because of the hydrochloric acid. Pepsin is an enzyme that breaks down the large protein into the smaller subunits, that is amino acids. Okay, and food is further broken down into a thin liquid, that is chyme. Okay, now taking the heart out of heartburn. As we very well know that the esophagus has a ring of muscles at the top and the bottom. If the bottom rings of muscle doesn't keep the lower part of the esophagus tightly closed between swallows, acid from the stomach can come up or come back up into the esophagus. This creates a burning sensation, and this is called as heartburn, which we have already, or you can say which we experience. Okay, but heartburn, it has nothing to do with the heart, please note that. And the pain a person may feel is in the area of the heart, but it would make more sense to call it esophagus burn. Okay, now comes the small intestine. Small intestine is the majority of the digestion occurs in the small intestine. This compartment has three distinct portions, each of which is highly specialized for different digestive functions. The first third is the duodenum. This part is responsible for signaling the distal digestive tract that a food is arriving and that the stomach should stop sending food. Okay. Chemical digestion is very active at this stage, and the food is broken down into basic proteins, carbohydrates, and the fats. Digestive enzymes are released from pancreas to enable the degradation process. Bile is released from the gallbladder and mixes with the chyme to aid in fat digestion and the absorption. Okay. Now, the second portion of the small intestine is jejunum. It is composed of many folds that increases the surface area for absorption, known as brush border membrane, which we'll be studying in detail. Okay. Chemical degradation continues at this point. Okay. I'm talking about the jejunum. Please note that. And once the chyme is broken down into its basic constituents, the process of the absorption occurs. Nutrients are moved across the membrane via active and the passive diffusion. In some instances, carrier molecules made by the liver, known as micelles, help carry fat across the border into the bloodstream. As the digestive product moves through the small intestine, different parts of the brush border membrane selectively allows the absorption of the different nutrients. The third portion of the small intestine is the ileum. Okay. It is responsible for the very selective absorption of some selective nutrients. Okay, I'm talking about the ileum. Okay, that includes vitamin B12 and vitamin C. By the end of the small intestine, the majority of the nutrients has been absorbed. The material is now mostly waste products and water and is referred to as a liquid stool. Okay, so in a summary, that stomach or small intestine is about 7 meters long, 2.5 centimeter in diameter. It is the longest part of the gut, of course. If we see the three parts, then it has duodenum, which is C-shaped first part. Okay, as you can see, this is the C-shaped first part, and then comes the jejunum, which is a middle part, and then comes the ileum, which is of course the terminal part. Okay. Now, villi. Villi are seen at the mucosa of the small intestine. Okay, and each villus has a brush border columnar epithelial cell which is provided with microvilli. Okay. Internal villus consist of a capillary network and a small lymph vessel that is lacteal. Okay, this is illustration of a villi. Okay, and this is the mucosa, this is the submucosa. Okay, and these are the muscle layers, these are the serosa. If we see the zoom view of the villus, then it is villi are like this. Okay, which is supplied by blood, by veins and the arteries. Okay. Now comes the wall of the small intestine. The inner surface of the small intestine is folded in a finger-like structures called villi, which greatly increases the surface area which is available for absorption. The villi have a surface area of about 30 meters square. This is equivalent to the size of the tennis court. Just imagine. Okay. Now, how the digestion takes place in the wall of the small intestine? With the help of proteases, maltases, sucrases, lactases, and the lipases. Proteases, as the name suggests, that it breaks down the peptides into the amino acids. Maltases, that breaks down the maltose to the glucose. Sucrase, it breaks down the sucrose to glucose and the fructose. Lactase, it breaks down the lactose fructose to glucose and the galactose. And the lipase, it breaks down fat to fatty acids and the glycerol. This is the illustration. Okay. Now, how the absorption in the small intestine takes place. Much absorption is thought to occur directly through the wall without the need of the special adaptations. Almost 90% of our daily fluid intake is absorbed in the small intestine, and of course it is absorbed by the villi that increases the surface area of the small intestine, and thus it provides better absorption of materials. Now, the absorption by the small intestine, it is through the villi and the microvilli, of course, that are finger-like projections that increases the surface area for the absorption, of course. Okay. Now we'll study villi in detail. Villi in the small intestine have a high blood supply. They are of two types of absorption which occur here: passive and the active. Passive, through the process of osmosis, the nutrients pass through the wall of the small intestine and into the blood supply. Active, a carrier transports the nutrient through the wall of the small intestine into the blood supply. This type of absorption requires energy because it has to move against the potential gradient. Okay. Once in the blood, the nutrients are transported to the liver via the hepatic portal vein. The liver filters, converts the nutrients into substances that can be used by the body cell for energy and the growth. Most fatty acids and glycerol pass into the lymphatic system and then the bloodstream. Once in the blood, nutrients are carried to the cells of the body. Some are oxidized to produce energy and others are used to repair the cell or to build new cells. Once the nutrients have been absorbed, the remaining chyme passes into the large intestine or the colon. Now comes the large intestine and the anus. It is about 1.5 centimeter long. It has three parts, of course: cecum, colon and the rectum. Okay. The large intestine has several major components. The cecum is the large boggy entrance to the right side of the colon. There is a circular muscle or the sphincter that separates the small intestine from the large intestine. The sphincter protects the small intestine from concentrated bacteria of the large intestine. Following the cecum, the ascending colon rises up and leads to the transverse colon. From there, the descending colon dives back down to the left side of the abdomen into the sigmoid colon and the rectum. Waste is finally eliminated through the anus. Okay, so this is the ascending colon, this is the transverse colon, this is the descending, this is the pelvic colon, and this is rectum. Okay, and then it is finally adjusted by anus, and this is the vermiform appendix. Please note that. Okay, and this is the cecum is it is well developed in herbivores. It is very small in man. It arises from the cecum is a finger-like projection, and the vermiform appendix, which is of course the vestigial in man. And then comes the colon. It is consists of ascending, transverse, descending, and the pelvic colon. Pelvic colon leads to the rectum that opens out by the anus. Rectum is for temporary storage of feces. Okay. Now comes the large intestine. A solid material pass through the large intestine. These are undigestible solids, fiber, and water is absorbed. Vitamin K and B are reabsorbed with the water. Rectum is a solid waste that exists in the body. Okay. And then comes the colon. The colon is a tube just over 1 meter long, which is inhabited by the bacteria. The main function of the colon is to absorb water into the bloodstream. Bacteria in the colon ferment dietary fibers and produce fatty acids and the gases. Other bacteria produces vitamin K, which is also absorbed. The products of bacterial digestion along with water and any remaining minerals are absorbed that leaves a residue behind. Okay, the watery residue moves along the colon and the feces are formed and stored in the rectum before being excreted through the anus. Young children gradually learn to control this action, okay, and it may take up to 12 to 24 hours for the feces to pass through the colon. This time can be reduced if diet is high in fiber. Large intestine colon function is to reabsorb water. It uses 9 liters of water every day in digestive juices. More than 90% of the water is reabsorbed. Not enough water is absorbed. Then diarrhea comes, and okay, and constipation also. Buddy, you have got a friend. That means it has bacteria inhabitant, okay, that is Escherichia coli, that produces vitamins, vitamin K and vitamin B. Okay, it generates gases, byproducts of bacterial metabolism, methane, hydrogen sulfide. Okay, this is the vermiform appendix, which is of course vestigial in human beings. Okay, now comes the rectum, which is the last section of the colon that eliminated feces, undigested materials, that is mainly cellulose from the plants, and roughage or the fiber. Okay, and then comes the anus, by which food is finally ingested. Okay, anus is guarded by the circular voluntary muscle, that is sphincterni. Okay, so this comes to an end. Thank you and stay tuned.